Chapter 7. The following morning Violet came in carrying a tray of breakfast. "Good morning," she said brightly, when she saw that Rue was awake in her bed. "Is my uncle okay?" Rue asked, her voice thick from sleep. "Mr. Fanshawe? He's fine, I guess. Why?" "He was bleeding last night," Rue said, lifting herself up and resting on her elbows. "Was he? Maybe he fell," Violet said breezily as she put the tray down on the window seat. "No, someone bit his face," Rue said. "I saw it." "I don't know about that, but I do know this. If I were 12 and the sun was shining—" Violet opened the window, poked her head out for a moment, then pulled it back in and turned to Rue. "I wouldn't be lying in bed worried about a little scratch on someone's face." It was a bite, not a scratch. Rue started, but Violet was already heading for the door. The house was silent and still. Through the open window, Rue heard the lulling sighs of the waves. It was as though the house and everyone in it, even the river itself, were trying to pretend that nothing had happened the night before. Rue ate, then dressed and hurried downstairs, careful to keep her steps light and quick. There was no one about, not in the west wing at least. She edged toward the east wing, listening. It was silent here too, though she stopped when she approached the threshold, not quite daring to get caught by Miss Valentine again. Outside, the air felt as if it had been washed clean. The day was cool, but the sun shone. Yesterday's storm had swept the last remaining ice floes from the river. The water was calm now, the crest of its shallow waves turning silver in the sunlight. Rue picked her way across the path to the bank. When she got there, she gazed down at the island with the olive-colored mansion, searching for the boy, the one they called the Fane. The windows in the house were dark. There was no sign of movement along the terraced landscape. She stayed for a long time, waiting for a shifting shadow or a twitching tree top to betray him. The river began to make a shush-shush sound, like a mother comforting her child. It drew Rue's attention away from the house and out towards the water. She watched the ripples rush forward, turning from a fresh blue to a copper color as they came close to the shore. She listened to the sound of waves breaking against the banks, as constant and regular as the ticking of a clock. It was so hypnotic that she stood there for some time, listening, till suddenly her eyes darted back to the olive green house. She had the funniest feeling that the boy was watching her now. It made her want to duck out of sight, but the rocks by the bank sloped steeply, offering no cover. A few yards off, though, her sharp eyes spotted a rock that jutted out more than the others. It would have been the perfect place to sit and watch the passing boats in the summer, but it was the space beneath the rock that interested her. She walked over, glancing surreptitiously towards the olive house, and knelt down beside the rock. There was a tiny crevice between it and the rock below, just large enough for Rue. In a moment she had squeezed through and found herself in a little cave with enough room for her to sit slightly crouched or to lie down on her side, legs bent. The view was a good one. She kept her eyes fixed on the olive house, which she could see quite clearly from the cave, sure that if she waited long enough the boy would come out and she could catch another glimpse of him. But when she stayed that way for a good hour and there was still no sign of him, she began to wonder if he was really still there after all. Sighing, she lay down on her side, her legs bent. Pressing her ear to the ground, she closed her eyes and listened to the hushed singing in the soil. It was such a tiny, complicated sound that it required the steadiest concentration. The stirring of worms' eggs in their cocoons, the pulse of roots, the minute shifting of bugs. Immediately Rue felt herself relax. Her world collapsed down into a tiny little bundle, just the way she liked it. After a while, another sound rose above the earth's hum, a soft pid-pad sound. Rue opened her eyes and looked through the crevice. Something was coming. She kept her body motionless and waited as the sound came nearer, hesitantly, as though nervous. Suddenly a small, black-furred face peered into the cave. It was a squirrel, though not the gray type that Rue was used to seeing. This one was charcoal black, with eyes that were bright and quick. He stared curiously at Rue, and she stared back, not daring to move a muscle. They stayed that way for some time until the squirrel suddenly lifted its head. His delicate round ears twitched, and then in a flash he was gone. Rue quickly scrambled out of her hiding place to watch the squirrel dash up the rocks and across the grassy slope, finally disappearing into a tangle of ivy clinging to the house. A moment later she heard a boat motor rev up and saw Miss Valentine pulling out of the lagoon in her Boston whaler. In the passenger seat was Mr. Fanshawe, and Rue could see a pair of suitcases in the rear of the boat. He was going away again. Maybe it was because of what happened last night. She wondered when he'd get back again. Hadn't Violet said he was often away? It might not be for a very long time. There was no reason for her to care, really, but she felt disappointed anyways. Each morning, Rue woke early and wolfed down her breakfast. She had never had much of an appetite back in Limpet, but lately she always seemed to be hungry. After that, she returned to her little cave. She kept a close watch for the Fane, struggling to catch a glimpse of him, but he didn't reappear. Still, she found that the island was full of other surprising things if you paid attention. Polished black water snakes that sunned themselves on the rocks and suddenly leapt into the river to churn the water near the bank. A mossy rock that unexpectedly trundled into the water and swam away, revealing itself to be a snapping turtle. Every day she put her ear to the ground inside the little cave, and every day she heard something new. Things were moving more briskly in the earth. The sun was waking things up. The black squirrel visited with her too. Sometimes he would just peek into the cave as if to check that she was still there, then scurry away. One time, though, he walked right into the cave and sat with her very companionably, stripping the scales off a pine cone. "You must be the only squirrel on the island. I haven't seen any others," she said to him. He looked at her when she spoke, turning the pine cone in his paws. Then he made a chattering noise, which seemed so friendly and encouraging that she spoke to him again. "I wonder how you got here. I don't think squirrels can swim, so you couldn't leave if you wanted to, could you?" The squirrel let a pine cone scale drop to the ground and glanced up at her. "But maybe you like it here." Later that same day she spied the green mailboat tearing through the river with Simon Lacombe at the wheel. "I don't mind him," she thought, then crawled out of the little cave to watch him approach the lagoon. This time, when he held up his hand in greeting, she held hers up too. "Just the lady I'm looking for," he called out to her. From the back of his boat he pulled out 4 boxes and stacked them up, largest to smallest. "These came for you." He wrapped his arms around the bottom box, gave the stack a quick upward jab with his knee to position it better, then started towards the house. Even with his burden, his long legs clattered quickly and easily, so that Rue had to jog to keep up with him. "What's in them?" she asked. "Too heavy to be tins of herring, too light to be bear cubs. My guess is that it's anything in between. Anyways, it's awfully bulky for Miss Valentine, so I thought I'd just pop around with it. So, Rue Fanshawe, what's the verdict?" He gave her a sidelong glance. "Is cough growing on you?" Rue thought for a minute. "I don't mind it," she said for the second time that day. Simon laughed. "I don't mind it," she says. "Why's that funny?" Rue demanded. "Because you sound exactly like an old river rat. Beautiful day out, isn't it?" "Oh, I don't mind it. It's high praise from a river rat." "Well, the river has been quiet lately," Rue defended, her change of heart, "and no one bothers me here. I can do whatever I want all day long." "Well, sure, who wouldn't like that?" Simon agreed, though his eyes flitted towards her with some concern before he started up the front steps. "Who is that little package for?" Rue asked abruptly. "The one you brought last time." Mr. Fanshawe, wasn't it? Can you grab the door for me, Rue?" Rue ran up ahead and pulled open the front door. "But it was addressed to P. Fanshawe, not E," Rue said as Simon walked in the house. People are always misspelling names. It's amazing that half the mail ever finds its way to the right place." He put the boxes down in the lobby and smiled at her. Rue looked at him carefully. His thick, round glasses obscured the expression in his eyes, but she could see nothing in his face to suggest he was hiding anything. "Well, whatever's in 'em." He slapped the box on top of the stack. I hope it's something you don't mind." "So long, Rue." After he left, Rue sat on the floor, picked up the smallest box and put it in her lap. It was a rectangular package the size of a cutting board. She had never received a package before, much less 4 of them. The shipping label said, Rue Fanshawe, Cough Rock, Clayton, New York, 13624. She found it oddly pleasing to see her name attached to the island. Her mind reached out toward the future and cautiously toyed with the idea of a life on Cough Rock. Summers that could be spent outside all day. The earth would sing loudly, and she had all the time in the world to listen to it. And in the winter, she could watch the ice begin to glaze the river, quieting it. It might grow so thick that she could walk out on it. The thought of standing on the river both frightened and excited her. And maybe she would see the Fane again. Maybe. Maybe she would even meet him someday. The idea thrilled her, though she couldn't quite say why. She had never in her life wanted to know anybody. Maybe it was because he hid too, and he seemed to do it better than she did. She picked at the edges of the packing tape until it came up, and then slowly she peeled it off across the box's seam. Lifting the lid, she found layers of silver tissue paper with twists of hairline-thin vines printed across it. She lifted up the paper one layer at a time until she uncovered something made of soft brown material. Pulling it out of the box, the material unfolded, and Rue saw that it was a pair of pants. Brown corduroys, nearly identical to the one she owned, but new and so velvety that she petted it like a cat. It was her size, too. The second box held sneakers. They weren't the same brand as her own torn-up pair, but the color was nearly the same. The box contained another pair of shoes, too, which was nothing like anything she owned, but was something she might have chosen for herself. Brown and plain, with flat rubber soles that would make no noise along the hallways. The third box held shirts in dark blues and dark greens, the same colors as her own t-shirts, and the last box held several pairs of jeans, some shorts, 2 nightgowns, 2 hooded sweatshirts, and nearly exactly like her own. What's this? Violet approached from the east wing, carrying a basket of laundry. Rue held up one of the sweatshirts. Did you order these? She asked Violet. Not me. Violet put down the basket and came over to sift through one of the boxes until she found a packing slip. Looks like your uncle ordered them. She picked up a few of the shirts and looked at them quizzically. The things Miss Valentine got for you were much nicer. I told him I liked my own clothes better, Rue said, remembering. Violet looked around at the other clothes in the boxes, a surprised expression on her face. So he brought you your own clothes? Rue nodded, frowning. Her uncle had barely seemed to notice her, and what he had noticed he hadn't appeared to like. I don't know what to think about him, she said, looking up at Violet. Yes, well, no one really does. Do you like him? Rue asked her curiously. Violet paused, as though she never really considered this before. It's hard to say. I doubt he cares if anyone likes him or not. That's why people think he's strange, I guess. It seems unnatural not to care what people think of you, doesn't it? Like a person who never blinks. People say that I'm strange, Rue said. You are. Violet nestled a sweatshirt back in its box. But I've seen stranger. She smiled in a private sort of way, a small, sad smile. Up in her room, Rue tried on all the clothes. They fit perfectly, much better than her old clothes really, which were all stretched out. She peeked in the vanity mirror, standing back so as to see her whole body. Dressed in the new brown corduroys and a green shirt, she looked like a fresher version of herself, as though all the wear and tear of life had never happened. She raked her hand through her hair. Was it her imagination, or did her face look fresher too? The color of her skin and eyes seemed clearer. My name is Rue Fanshawe, and I live on Cough Rock, she murmured at her reflection. Her voice was timid, but the words themselves sounded right. I live on Cough Rock, she repeated with more confidence. I live with my uncle. He's away a lot, but I don't really mind. I found this little cave. She stopped, realizing she was no longer talking to her reflection, but imagining what she might say to someone else. The shadowy image of the Fane popped into her mind. I might tell him about the cave, she thought. He seemed like a person who could keep a secret. I might even tell him about the humming. Did you make the storm come? She whispered to the mirror. Rue jerked her head up suddenly, and her eyes narrowed. Something in the room had changed. It was such a slight shift that only someone whose senses were as keen as hers would have noticed it. The air quivered. She listened with the same concentration that she listened to the earth. Then she heard it. The humming. She rushed down the hallway, the humming sound growing more and more distinct till she found herself inside the girls' dormitory. Here the sound was the loudest, though still muffled. She walked around the room, pressing her ear against the walls, yet she still could not pin down where it came from. It was so distant, yet it was coming from inside the house. Not a ghost. No, this was a person, a living person, she was sure of it. Was it P. Fanshawe? Was it the same person who had bit her uncle's face? Finally, Rue perched herself on the iron headboard of one of the beds and listened to it. There was nothing frightening in it. In fact, there was something familiar about it, though she couldn't say what. It gave her the same sense of maddening familiarity she had felt when looking at her uncle's face. The same, yet not the same. It weaved through the air around her. Sometimes it sounded tentative, as if it were testing something out. Other times it would gain in force, calling out, almost pleading. Then, as if it heard itself and was ashamed, it grew soft again. Suddenly she knew why the humming sounded so familiar. It was exactly how she sounded back in her own room, all alone, and talking to her reflection in the mirror.